Hello, welcome to Loremaster's Lair. I'm your Loremaster, and today we are here for another tale of a long-lost kingdom. I've been slowly working through these, and now am just missing the coastal run for those we have a nice story for. That said, the Eye of Abednego will wait a while till around the time I do the rest of the Maragny. Its lands are out of the embargo I had them all under, but I have another list I want to check things off of first. So, today, we'll be looking at the ancient empire of the Cyclops, Ghol-Gan. Starting off, why is the ancient Cyclops Kingdom held separately from the rest of the surrounding Maragny? Because it is separate from the Maragny. You see, long ago, before the events of Earthfall, the continent of Grund extended out into the Arcadian Ocean, with the remains of the landmass being more closely related to the Shackles than the mainland, though the coastal region is still heavily dotted in ruins. These islands are the remains of a large mountain range where the Cyclops first appeared. The prehistoric Cyclops Empire is one we have no information on because, well, that's what prehistoric means. What we do know is that this empire grew to encompass most of what is today the Shackles and the Sunlands, and that during this period they began interacting with other intelligent creatures. The classical period, in turn, began when most prehistoric periods end, the beginning of the writing system. It is also marked by the beginning of the worship of deities of the sun and the moon, worship because they too were one-eyed creatures. No mention of whether these were specific deities or whether this was a form of animism. That is something I hope Paizo dives deeper into one day. Either way, they consider the fact that they had only one eye a blessing, and, like most intelligent creatures, decided they were chosen to rule over lesser races with only two eyes. Well, not only two eyes, you know what I meant. Either way, the Cyclops of Ghol-Gan started building cities, preferring to build taller than wider, both up towards their gods and down towards the Darklands. It was here they first came into contact with Regeron, or the Sleepless Realm, and some of the last of the Serpantfolk in these caves, still remaining relatively close to where their god died. While they outnumbered the Cyclops, eventually a great general named Zalti laid them down low, and she became the last great ruler of Ghol-Gan before its decline. But before the fall, this is a perfect time for our first side tangent of the day, the part of the show where I dig up those long buried, but never quite dead. As the Serpantfolk's fall, this is actually a perfectly good time to talk about the deity, Ydersius. The deity was an immortal, ever-generating Serpantfolk who appeared a little different from his fellows. Constant ability to generate was seen as a sign of the Serpantfolk Empire's ability to last forever. That was until Siveth, an Atlantean general, managed to sever the head from the deity's shoulders, even if she herself was fated to die at battle's end from the creature's legendary threefold poison: his venom, his toxic blood, and his miasma. However, the deity would have still regenerated, so the body was cast into the Darklands, and the head was cast into fire. This beheaded the Serpantfolk Empire, but the deity still lives, a mad, headless mass still able to commune with his followers, but unable to establish long-term plans besides rage. Still, various lizardfolks, troglodytes, boggarts, nagas, some assassins, and of course Serpantfolk, worshipped the god of poison, committing human sacrifices and working to regain the reach of the Serpantfolk's power to what it once was, and also potentially get their god's head. The end of the Serpantfolk did not bring an end to the civilization. As the Cyclops spread below the ground, they picked up on many of the ancient rituals of the Serpantfolk and their gods. We do not get much information on these gods, but many of them seem to err on the Lovecraftian side. Either way, Cyclops soon found these tunnels to have a dark benefit. It was a place out of sight from the sun and the moon, and therefore a place to do practices outside of the deity's teaching. It quickly devolved from there, the Cyclops taking up many of the brutal and twisted practices of the post-Ydersius Serpantfolk, including blood sacrifices, cannibalism, and all that. The wise among them saw their empire falling apart and tried to stop the tragedy, but most were sent in exile, if not either sacrificed or eaten, or both. The deeper their sins became, the more the Cyclops tried to escape the consequences by looking at darker and darker deities, indiscriminately killing each other and breeding with other creatures to create twisted hybrids. They tried to reclaim the empire which once was theirs, but it only drove them further from the light, which was also a time period of side tangent number 2, and the Cyclopean civilizations. As the intellectuals were exiled and the nation became more and more corrupt, the exiles tried to establish themselves elsewhere. This led to the birth of at least 2 other nations that we know of, Ghol-Gan and Ydersius. Ydersius is one of the oldest human nations in Casmoon. Here, Cyclops and the beginnings of human civilization formed a symbiotic relationship, known as myth-speaking. This is an ancient tradition which allows mortals to gain mythic powers by following the visions of the seer Cyclops. For millennia, the various city-states have been ruled by these hero gods, themselves a topic for another day. But with the age of lost omens, these prophecies, and traditions which have come with them, might be coming to their end. In turn, further north, Ghol-Gan was built in the area which today is part of the Casmoon nation of Eobaria. Not much is known about it, though its relics can be found across eastern Avestan and Gurund, and the nation fell during Earthfall. And like the side tangent, so too the main topic. When Earthfall happened, many old empires ended, but like Aslan, the fall of Ghol-Gan was more severe. The central part of the nation sunk below the waves, with only the edges of the empire staying above ground. Well, above waves, I guess. So was born Mediogalti Island and the Shackles, and so laid resting what would one day become the shorelines of the Sutherland and the modern expanse. While the empire has fallen, the ruins still exist to this day, hidden just over another horizon which locals know well enough to stay away from. So let's go through some examples. Egregsia exists on the west side of the Terra Lake, it being known for freshwater predators and hidden free captain treasures. The Gutblood Labyrinth is a peek at the underground infrastructure which still remains, able to be reached through a large chasm opened by Earthfall. And it is a peak that will continue forever if you lose yourself in the endless maze. Ydersius is now a field, but once was a fighting arena where Cyclops slaughtered each other. The infrastructure is gone, but the ghosts have never left. The Temple of the Ravenous Moon was once central to the worship of the moon goddess, eventually twisted to a place to sacrifice newborns. Neat. At the deepest part of Ziggurat, a twisted aberration still sits chained to the entrance of Darklands. Further north, upon the edges of the Eye of Abednego, is the Temple of Xanthan, a ziggurat built after the beginning of the alien worship, and home to both the spirit of the Empire's last ruler and his famed golden phoenix aviary. Finally, Ganagsu is ruins which sit on the furthest reaches of the shackles, upon the Cannibal Isles. And among these ruins sits our third side tangent. After all, there are still creatures here who fit better as creatures of Ghol-Gan than shackles. The Koro people were natural inhabitants of the shackles. But as pirates began taking each island for their own, they were slowly pushed aside until they were pushed to the farthest islands. The islands they were always told to avoid because their people have said it was cursed. And they were right, because in one of the abandoned ziggurats out in these distant depths slept one of the ancient deities worshipped by Serpantfolk, then the Cyclops, a giant worm known as the Blood Queen. There are many things about the creature which are unknown, but it quickly went to work on the Koro, rapidly transforming them into the same kind of creatures the Cyclops were in their empire's last days. Bloodthirsty cannibals who only looked like the same creatures they once were. Cannibalistic native stereotype, to be sure, but that does not make the Koro any less interesting. Same way Lovecraftian creatures are. Which fits, as the Blood Queen seems to be fit HP's mad musings more than any other category. Again, never really given that much information about these gods worshipped by the later Cyclops, but let's get back to the main show. That said, our ruins are on the surface, or on the seabed, with a large amount still down below in Regoroi. While now abandoned, or at least abandoned by the Cyclops, the area still has the markings of the dark rituals. To enter, there is an often overlooked tunnel under the island of Eel's Skull. Other entries are said to exist, including one on Mediogalti Island, potentially under the Crimson Citadel itself. Either way, the main tunnel through the Darklands, known here as the March of Madness, is shorter than the similar path under Avestan known as the Long Walk. But it makes up for it by being built for giants instead of for medium-sized creatures. It has also been known to be home for primordial flora and wonderful hot springs, as well as the typical purple worms. Now, before we end it off, I still have a final side tangent. All things considered, I wish to use it to talk about Cyclops. Not just the regular, but all 6 subspecies. Cyclops, as a brief introduction, are giants with one eye, which have the power to see into the future. For the most powerful, this allows them to see the destiny of any human that catches their glance. For most, it only allows them to see a few seconds in the future. This is what a standard Cyclops is. Greater Cyclops are larger and more muscular, but unable to control their precognition, forcing them to see visions they cannot control, mostly to their detriment. The opposite, ocular Cyclopses, are smaller and thinner, but have better control over their abilities. Kabanda are headless creatures with a face on their chest. It is said they are agreed to guard various hidden places in exchange for a long life, and today they remain hidden away for adventurers to stumble upon when least expected. Now after those 4, we have 2 non-Cyclops Cyclopses. First, the Goldako, which are just undead Cyclops. More interesting, and more important in today's discussion, Nagoga. These are a cross between orangutans and Cyclops, made by the alien gods of Ghol-Gan. While still lacking intelligence, the Cyclops of Ghol-Gan made excellent use of them as war machines. And that is today's video. With that, we have done Jiska, Assyrian, Socros, Thessalonian, Targoth, and today's video. Outside of getting more information on Nishbaran, only the solid lands remain on my Ancient Kingdom checklist. That said, my ethnicity checklist is my current big goal, so I'm planning on going hard on countries the next month for a certain area. Where are we headed? Tune in next time to find out.